The future of the U.S. Postal Service remains uncertain as the agency finds itself in the middle of a high-stakes debate over how to vote in America. The president has insisted, without evidence, that voting by mail leads to widespread fraud, and he's tied funding to the Postal Service to his legislative agenda. Senior White House advisor Jared Kushner spoke to Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan about the administration's concerns with universal mail-in voting.
Dr. Fauci said this week that there should be no fear for people to go out and vote in person. Number two, I have a friend in New Jersey, just got married. That person got sent 2 ballots, one in her old name and one in her new name. I think what President Trump wants is a fair election. If you have a tried and true system where they've been doing it like absentee ballots, where there's some security mechanisms built in, that's totally acceptable. That's a great thing to do. But you can't have a new system being tried where there's not the right time to do it and expect them to get it right and then expect that Americans will have confidence in the elections.
For more, Face the Nation moderator Margaret Brennan joins me from Washington. Margaret, always good to see you. You really pressed White House advisor Jared Kushner about the necessity of access to mail-in voting. Did you get the sense that the Trump administration is concerned with what that could mean for people hoping to vote in support of the president?
Well, this is what is interesting to me, which is, put the principle aside, which is hard to do for a moment, that you actually do want people to feel comfortable in the middle of a pandemic, being able to vote and being able to stay enfranchised. There is a legitimate argument to be had about just whether this can operationally be done in this short period of time in every single state. From a political point of view, since Jared Kushner is so involved with campaign strategy, I was curious about whether he'd thought of this problem hurting their campaign. Because if you look at the results from back in 2016, Donald Trump did better with people in that age group of 65 and over than his Democratic rival did. And those are the people who are described as vulnerable, most vulnerable to this virus. So it could seemingly backfire if there is a strategy to it that is politically motivated, which the administration says it's not. Of course, they say this is about operationally being able to be conducted in a short period of time. That's what they say their objection is when trying to explain what the president has been saying over the past few days. And so it's not clear to me that if this is a political strategy, it would benefit Republicans, actually. It might not. And so Jared Kushner was saying, he didn't really address that specific demographic. He was saying it is safe to go into polling stations, which, to be fair, Dr. Anthony Fauci said he personally would do it, and he does think it should be and will be safe in the fall.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting when you also had this conversation with Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves about his unwillingness to even allow people with comorbidities or other compromised immune systems, concerns about coronavirus, to even request an absentee ballot. Can you explain to our viewers his response?
I know. It surprised me because I know this issue isn't something that I brought up out of nowhere. It's something his own state government has debated, whether the rules that would allow you to request an absentee ballot should be adjusted to allow for people who simply are fearful of getting COVID and don't want to go to the polls. And so therefore, apply for absentee ballots. And he said no, essentially, in that argument, saying, and he kept using a phrase which he didn't explain, though I asked him about legitimate votes and what he meant by that. But as you heard, he spoke specifically for his party in saying he was confident the president would be reelected either way. But he represents Republicans and Democrats in his state, so I was curious about the health of all of them and being able to vote that way. But he made clear his state government has already decided the matter and it's not going to be revisited, and he didn't seem to say it should be. What's extraordinary about that is that they have a 23% positivity rate. That is the highest in the country. And so it would not be surprising if some people felt safer voting by mail.
Yeah. And well, it was interesting, too, because in your interview with Kushner, he was trying to make what we've heard from the White House in the last couple of days, this distinction between universal mail-in voting and people being able to request absentee ballots. And in the case of the Mississippi governor, he wasn't even willing to let there be a reason for additional mail-in requests for voting. I want to follow up with you just one more point about Governor Reeves, because you were presenting information about the state of coronavirus in Mississippi right now. And I was surprised that he seemed to be dismissing the numbers that were coming from his own health department.
That's right. And, you know, we have a team of researchers here who go through and pull all those state briefings, and we read over them to prepare for the show. And that's what that number came from in terms of the hospitals and how at capacity, they're not there yet, but could be soon, because this is a relatively small healthcare system in that state of Mississippi. It's not Texas, it's not California, it's not New York City. And so it wouldn't be hard to get to a place where, as the governor acknowledged, you know, it wouldn't take much to tap out the system. He seemed to say and to believe that they have things under control, and as he was arguing, the numbers seem to be turning a corner. And this may be also just a bigger picture, feeding off of what the White House has been messaging in terms of what we heard from that new policy advisor this week, Dr. Atlas, and what the president has said. They seem to be saying, if you just protect the vulnerable, everyone else can go out because the chances of them dying from the disease aren't as high. And that goes in contradiction to what epidemiologists like Dr. Fauci say, which is you have to control the virus, period. Stop the chain of transmission. So even if you're asymptomatic, that's great. You aren't sick, but you're still spreading it, and therefore you should be contained. That's what Dr. Fauci would argue. And the White House messaging has changed around what Dr. Atlas was presenting here. And so there may be other Republican governors who ascribe to that, who say, look, you got to take a risk. Anyhow, life's risky, and this is just one of them.
Well, let's get back over to voting, because there's still so many threads to pull at here. But the concern about foreign interference, like we saw in 2016, has been something that is being debated. And you spoke with the co-founder of a company that specializes in information security. What's he worried about ahead of the 2020 election, and what does he advocate as the best way to conduct voting for November?
Well, Dmitry Alperovitch has his own firm now, but back in 2016, when he was at CrowdStrike, he is the one, along with that firm, who identified who hacked the DNC server. It was their piecing together that determined they were Russian hackers. The Republican Party also went on to hire that firm and him in 2018 to figure out who had been hacking some of their information in that congressional election campaign. So he is someone who knows what to look for when it comes to some of these cyber fingerprints, so to speak. And it was interesting for him to say that the most secure way to vote is paper, not cyber. He is concerned that election infrastructure can be meddled with. And if you look at what has been laid out within the past few weeks by the Trump administration, by the U.S. intelligence community, they are also seeing that probing and that surveillance. And remember, in 2016, it was determined by a bipartisan group, along with the U.S. intelligence community, but also bipartisan group of senators, that Russia had gone in and looked at state voter rolls in places like Florida. They'd done some surveillance. Votes weren't changed, at least that's not what the U.S. intelligence community found. And so there is concern that if that happened then and that happens 4 years later, what will be the consequence? And Alperovitch was laying out his greatest area of concern.
All right, Margaret Brennan, thank you.
Thank you.
And remember, you can see Face the Nation right here on CBSN. It streams at 10:30 a.m., 1 p.m., and 4 p.m. Eastern every Sunday.